think we can get started. I am Tom O'Connor, and I'm on the board of the US, the American branch of the Academy of Professional Dialogue, and we've a couple of board members here today. We've been forming as a team, and we're really trying to just build up the American side of the Academy. And we have people like Robert Sarley here this morning, whom I think was the first person to start the US Academy. Robert, that's how I see you, as the founder in that sense. You're the person who pulled it together at the very beginning. And I wanted to introduce a couple of the board members. We have Jenny Amison and Mino Akhtar, Robert Corman, Rebecca Canera, and Nancy Dixon is our president. I don't know where Nancy is. She's not here at the moment. And Peter Garrett is on the board as well from the international. He's our international representative. So we have 7 of us are working, and we put together this series, a series of 3 conversations, really. We wanted to try and make a sense of community and build conversations, build places where we can practice together, learn together, and dialogue together. So we turned immediately to Rooken. Rooken is a friend of ours, and you'll get to know Rooken a little bit today, but immediately when you meet Rooken, you connect with him. And Rooken was at the beginning of the Academy of Professional Dialogue. Rooken has been around since right from the very beginning too. He's been part of just a whole network of people across the world that are talking and thinking about dialogue. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Rooken, but we're hoping to have more of a conversation today. But Rooken's going to guide us and facilitate us and kind of set the context for us to work together.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom. So yeah, the first thing I'd love to do is just reclaim my novice status. When I look at who's all out there, yeah, I feel somewhat intimidated, but I'm also very excited to be here. And I'm really hoping that by the end of today's session, I could have left you with 1 or 2 little things that might be incredibly useful. And one in particularly, a particular tool and practice around generative leadership that I hope you'll be able to use in your private lives, but also in your work. And I suppose that if I think about it, at the heart of my work is really an invitation to everybody I work with to live and work on purpose, collaboratively with others, from a place of high intention and focused on specific desired results. So what I'd love to do today, Tom, is also just give a sort of brief introduction, a little bit of background about where we're working at the moment. And when I say we, I've got my partners on the call too, Margot Newdigate. She's my producer and kind of keeps me in line and keeps me honest and gives me strong feedback after our work together. But I suppose most importantly is what I'm wanting to do with dialogue is make it popular. A judgment that I have oftentimes around dialogue is it seems a very refined way of communicating and somewhat obscure. And I remember sitting with Bernard, who's I don't believe is with us today, but in one of the academy courses saying, "Are we in dialogue yet?" And none of us could say, whether we were in dialogue yet. So it seemed a bit obscure. And over time, what I've tried to do is try and get a lot clearer for myself about whether we're in dialogue, what dialogue is, and yeah, a whole bunch of things that we might be allied to. So over time, I built a bit of a model, and beneath that model, a bunch of frameworks that sweep in dialogic practice, that sweep in cognitive agility and critical thinking, and then also emotional intelligence, emotional moods, etc. And more specifically over time, what we've been noticing in working with our clients is increasingly clients are coming to the work or coming to the conversations or meetings fairly dysregulated. I'm pretty sure it's similar in the US, but in South Africa, the current context and social environment is highly fragmented. We struggle with basic services like electricity. I'm very delighted we're able to be online today. We live in the countryside. It takes 4 farm gates to get to us. We get our water out of a river. We generate our own solar or some solar panels and a wind generator. And we recently got a satellite because our base stations have been going down with load shedding going forward. So in that sort of context, and then obviously a South African story, which some of you may be familiar with, that still needs to resolve. A lot of people find themselves post-COVID and in the world of work in back-to-back meetings online with all the associated stresses of that. And so a big chunk in some of our assumptions about coming together and having good conversations is that people are in a resourceful state in order to be able to have those conversations. So we've done a lot more work around helping people develop that resourcefulness, and I'll talk very briefly about that shortly. But maybe what I'd love to do, just to sort of kick off and for us to work into it almost immediately, is just to share with you a little typical what we call an outside check-in, and I'll explain this shortly. And this may be familiar to many of you, but what we do in our work is really we try to encourage people to develop a sense of mindfulness throughout their day, from situation to situation, meeting to meeting, event to event. And we use this very simple model called the affect circumplex just to help people locate where they might be. So the affect circumplex is just a sort of model to reflect on how activated or deactivated you may be feeling. And I'd love you to do this just for yourself, and to what degree you may be pleasantly activated or unpleasantly activated. And the basic idea is, we're in our best shape when we're at sort of top right, alert, excited, elated, happy. We're resourceful in that place. We're less resourceful as we go left, but that's not a terrible place to be. Sometimes we need to be slightly activated, unpleasantly, anxiously, helps us to focus, etc. Good place to be periodically is obviously bottom right, when we're in that space of being relaxed and calm and social, that space of rest and digest. And then, typically the most unresourceful place for people to sort of find themselves is in that bottom left, where we're bored, depressed, sad, etc. So really what we're finding in terms of underpinning good dialogue is that people that come together to have conversations, that they're well-resourced and are feeling very toward the conversation and appropriately aroused in the process. So just a little bit of reflection for yourself. Where are you located at the moment? And then also as part of that, a little bit of a body scan. Are you feeling any tightness or constriction anywhere? I know it's the morning for you, it's the evening for us here, but after a day of being on Zoom or back-to-back meetings, you may be carrying a bit of stress in your shoulders or neck, so we just encourage people to connect with their bodies and to shake that out or to move. Also get people to reflect a little bit maybe on what's capturing their attention at the moment. Maybe there's a particular issue or concern or challenge that they're sitting with. A lot of our clients sit with worrying about customer queries and customer problems and stuff like that. Some of them have got 4 screens that they're working off as they try to be and work with us. And so just that mindful awareness of our ontology. Our ontology is literally our way of being. And so our ontology is made up of kind of the 3 domains of our body and our orientation towards a situation, our thinking and language, and our emotions and moods. So we have a couple of choices that we can make around some of those ontological choices in terms of being resourceful. And obviously the ontology of the observer is important, where I'm observing from and listening from. An awareness of how I'm thinking and speaking, the language I'm using, the framing I'm using around situations. And then some awareness around feelings and emotions and moods, and how we might be using those resourcefully in articulating and negotiating needs. So that would typically be what we would call an outside check-in, and we encourage everybody to develop this muscle of self-reflection. People use it prior to meetings, prior to conversations that they might have, anything that they sort of are going into and they would like to maybe ground themselves or just be a little bit more regulated in terms of approaching the conversation. So before I go any further, any questions or thoughts around this idea of managing our ontology?
Rooken, as I looked at the wheel with all the options, I found I could select at least one out of each one of those 4 quadrants. So I think maybe I'm a little conflicted today. So I feel sad and serene and happy and upset. So it quite a getting in touch moment, but thank you.
Lovely. Yeah, and I think that's appropriate. There's no sort of, but there may be one or in different situations you may find yourself particularly activated more than others. So the affect circumplex, just a lovely simple model for people to work with. They can generally access it quite quickly. We link it to some of the social neuroscience, that sort of feeling of being toward or away. You know, I've got a meeting coming up. Am I toward the meeting? Am I toward the conversation, or am I away? And we link that then into the social field. It's just a way for us to start getting a sense of our ontology, our way of being as we approaching the work and getting into the conversations. I think the second bit that I'm particularly interested in, let me just go there quickly, is this idea around some of the dialogic practices. And so I know you folks are all very familiar with this. I just want to see where I've lost you now. So some of the dialogic practices. Is there anybody who's not familiar with these dialogic practices that I think were developed by Bill and Peter in their early days together? So these dialogic practices, we find them increasingly sort of mix of the conversational actions and then the practices being particularly useful. You know, it's just 4 things that people can come back to, 4 things that people can commit to prior to any conversation. And something that is helpful not only in terms of conversational actions and managing the underlying structures of conversations and dialogue, but we see these dialogic practices as being useful not just for dialogue, but any conversation. So we use them in debates, we use them in discussions, conversations, dialogue, etc. And so, it's, you know, very simply in terms of our work and what we've been doing more recently is we've been working around kind of 8 practices that we've developed and clarified. And you know, I'm very aware, one of the things that I think is interesting in our work is increasingly I'm getting clearer that it's important to understand what the job to be done is. So a lot of our clients don't really care too much about how we might get the job done. And if they could take a blue or red pill, they would take it. But in terms of doing our work, we've identified kind of 8 particular practices that help us integrate some of these ontological practices and the dialogic practices. So primarily starting with communicating dialogically. 2 is something we call clean talk. It's a mode of owning our data, owning our thinking and feeling, and owning our wants and needs, and being able to articulate that without projecting it onto others. Leading generatively, which we'll spend most of our chunk of time on today, and just introduce a little model and framework work with that. The idea of nurturing our social field, this idea that conversations are the aperture through which we unfold the resources of the social field, that everything we need sits in the social field, and the quality of our conversations, the quality of my ontology and interaction with others, then also sets up the quality of the social field. So taking care of the social field, obviously in an environment of increasing fragmentation, etc., is important, but it's important because basically, if we've got a great social field, almost anything is possible. And if we don't, almost nothing is possible. So it's something that we really encourage our clients to focus on and manage. And it's part of creating an environment that feels safe and social and connected. And obviously psychological safety flowing from that. Then managing our way of being, we focus predominantly there in people's, in the body. So we are using things like this, the affect circumplex. We are using polyvagal theory. We are sort of teaching people basic skills around regulating breathing, techniques they can use to stimulate their vagus nerve and get back into regulation. Just really simple basic stuff that people can work with to bring down their heart rates or manage their physiology, their way of being a little bit better. Then we do a little piece around managing cognitive agility and thinking collaboratively and critically. Our cognitive agility is thinking from the 4 perspectives. Thinking from the perspective of potential and opportunity, thinking from the perspective of people and connection, and then working obviously with the perspective of the observer, noticing data and observing without judgment, and then the challenger, challenging with respect. And then, allied to that, then emotional intelligence and agility. We do a little piece around interpersonal games and drama. And then the last piece, we sort of pull it all together with this idea of breakdowns are inevitable. We live our life and our relationships go from sort of being harmonious to disharmonious to repair to going forward again harmoniously. But certainly what we're wanting people to do here is be very towards breakdowns. This idea that breakdowns are to be welcomed. They're just symptoms of a system or an environment needing to evolve and grow and perhaps become more sophisticated. So we really are encouraging people. We've got tools that we developed called accountability adventures that allow people to take radical responsibility and mutual accountability as they work into trying to make sense of how this has happened and what to do going forward. So I just wanted to share this a little bit with you because this is sort of where we are at the moment. I think the other big shift for us has been from offering initially a course to now sort of understanding very clearly that we need to offer an action learning program, that there's such a divide between knowing and doing. And often the clients don't take care of that piece. So increasingly, we've had to go down the value chain and get more involved in structuring opportunities for people to revise and refresh their memories and move from knowing to practice with learning partners, teaching others, doing little presentations in order to get them to start using the practices and the various tools that we work with. So yeah, I hope that's helpful, but just to give you a little bit of a view in terms of my practice of where we're focusing and what we're interested in at the moment. I'm not sure if there are any questions or if that's been appropriately clear for everybody.
This is Nancy Rooken. I particularly liked number 4 because it's not saying that you, the leader, are responsible for the social field. It's saying everyone is responsible. And that's different. Often we think that the leader's responsibility is maintaining the social field, but this feels very different.
Yeah, it is. And Nancy, I love that you raised that. I mean, I think, you know, just even in terms of how we think of, recently I work at, I'm part of a little conservancy body where we live. And we've moved the idea, you know, we'd have an annual general meeting, and then the feeling used to be people would sort of crit the committee and give some, you know, feedback around how well the committee did. We've moved that now to say, well, as a community, we need to reflect how we've done together. It's not just up to the leaders or the committee members or whatever to be doing that work. And I think, you know, that goes true for this work, and especially in dialogue. At the end of a dialogue session, you know, our reflection is, how did we do? You know, were you able to speak and voice authentically? Did you say everything you wanted to? Were you able to listen participatively and build on what, you know, people were bringing, etc.? So yeah, I love that. And just increasingly more and more, I think the question is, how do we build a social field? You know, a lot of our clients are online, so they're having to do extra things, bring people into the office, have little hubs or little get-togethers to introduce each other socially, so that we can connect and feel safe and social and connected together. So it's for me, it's a massive piece for us to do well, and I think for the academy as well. I think one of, you know, we'll maybe get into it shortly, but I think it's one of the things we really need to do well is if we're going to be able to create an environment that feels psychologically safe for us to be able to speak authentically, then there's something we need to be doing to support that. And obviously those are the conversations we generally need to be having. So thank you for that. Anybody else want to support Nancy on that?
Well, I would add, Rooken, that just the simple check-in at the beginning. I was traveling yesterday. I was late last night getting home, you know, so I was a bit discombobulated. But the simple check-in really just brings me back. I'm amazed when you just do it how simple it is, but it just kind of grounds you. But the other thing I'm thinking to pick up on your point, Nancy, you also have to ground into the social field, not just into your own field. So that's what I think we're trying to do here today as well, is nurture this social field.
Yeah, lovely. So
this is Harold, and as I certainly support Nancy, because as I reflect on our organization, the only way we're going to make progress if we recognize that we're all in this together, and that we all share responsibilities of nurturing that social field. And so if we're not doing that as an organization, we're not going to be successful as an organization.
Yeah, spot on. So Harold, what are some of the things you've been exploring or been doing to sort of build that relational competence?
Well, there's a lot that we do, and we have different models that we use. For example, we have a model that's called the empowerment model. And in that empowerment model, we talk about responsibilities and what causes real empowerment. While the leader has responsibilities to be a catalyst, the leader will not do it alone. The leader may get something started, but unless the leader invites genuinely the active engagement and participation of others, it's not going to work. And so we teach them that little model that talks about the leader's responsibility and role, but then the responsibility and role of individuals, and then how together we create meaning. Working together, we create meaning that's then used to advance the organization further.
Beautiful, lovely. So folks, I can't see the hands. Ellen, I can see your hand is up, but I'm not sure if other hands are up. Please just claim the space. Ellen, do you want to?
Yeah, the idea of what we're working towards is very appealing to me. It seems that words like progress and purpose are putting the horse before the cart, and that oftentimes that becomes the focus, and therefore the ability to get to that place is lost. This seems to be more ability to chart and to monitor a way to get to a group understanding, a group goal of communication before getting to, well, what do we want out of this? The ability, what we want out of this, it seems to me, is the ability to communicate, especially in the day and age that we're living in, where there is so much, at least to me, it seems, so much disinformation, misinformation, and lack of civility, that what we're coming to together here, for me, what I'm coming here for, is the ability to express ourselves how, in whatever manner, shape, or form that expression takes, in an environment that's safe, so that we can share collaboratively. So this is why I'm here, and this is what I'm looking forward to.
Thank you. That's great. So just allied and built into the social field is also a kind of a self-awareness from some of the polyvagal theory and neuroscience around our ability to co-regulate with others. So, you know, what we're also teaching people is, if I'm dysregulated, you know, what do I do? Do I go to safe and friendly faces? Do I breathe? What can I do to regulate myself so I don't then get into an environment and potentially dysregulate others because I'm furious or feeling thwarted or frustrated, whatever it might be. So I think increasingly this idea is, if I'm pretty well regulated, I'm a resource to others who are under stress or who are having difficulty. So, you know, also sensitivity to managing myself, but also then being able to support a colleague who's having a tough time with a client, or come back from a tough client meeting, or whatever it might be. But just to build on what you were saying there as well, I think one of the things, Alan, that we notice a lot in corporate life, and I'm using corporate because at the moment we're working predominantly with corporate clients and not with community organizations, is one of the most overlooked voices in all the work is the client. The client's seldom in the room. Seldom have conversations where the client voice is represented. And we need to sweep the client into being part of the social field. You know, so if we hold a view that's less organizational, more systemic, we can see our clients and our suppliers and a whole bunch of people as part of the system that's co-creating what we need to have in place, and those bunch of relationships as well. So the other thing that I think, and we'll come to the model a little bit later, is also this idea that because of that, a lot of the thinking and planning and design work we've done, and I know by definition when we start talking about systems thinking and design thinking, we're talking more about stakeholders and context. But we're certainly encouraging our clients to be more context aware. So to what degree are they aware of what's potentially unfolding in the context, sensitive to it, in what way might they support that unfolding, and that's, you know, that's leading them powerfully into a sense of purpose in terms of what they do and how they approach the work. So maybe what would be useful at this stage is just to share with you a little bit a generative model that we've developed and have been working a lot with. Let's go back here. Sorry, Alan, is your hand still up?
Yeah, I'm in the United States. Corporations have been deemed entities, seen as individuals for a variety of reasons, mostly self-serving. And so I'm not connected to any corporation or anything of that sort. And so I think that it's important, and I see what you, at least from what I'm seeing, the relating on a human level, on a face-to-face level, on a, I can hear you, you can hear me, we are communicating to me, seems to me to be important. And once it becomes corporations, and corporations stop being, like you said, people don't show up for meetings, I wonder how communication is even possible in an environment where people are not actually face to face or even Zoom to Zoom. I wonder about whether we really can achieve what you're talking about. And that's an honest question for me. Again, I'm not involved in corporations. I'm not involved in business in that way. But I do believe that when people see each other, hear each other, connect on a personal level, that those relationships can then translate into higher level or more complex levels like corporations. So when you're talking from a corporation standpoint of getting your client to do this and corporations, people don't show up, I wonder if that is in and of itself an obstacle that you then have to scale back to what you're actually saying you're doing.
Yeah, so I love that, Alan. I think what I'd like to just sort of build on that is one of the things that we're aware of is when we're working virtually like this, what's challenging is typically when we get together face to face, we use our social engagement system. Those of you who are familiar with polyvagal theory will know that we have a social engagement system which is made up of our face, our voice, our tone. And so typically, quite often when we're trying to get work done online, people are miles away, we can hardly see them. And we use our social engagement system. We read finally people's muscles around their eyes, we hear their voices, etc. So quite often just the very basics, it's saying to people, take care of your visuals, get good audio, do what you can to allow people to see your face and for you to see theirs as best as possible. Almost how can we recreate to our best ability that closeness that we might have in a room. And it's really basic stuff. We're not doing anything, advanced other than sort of encouraging people to keep their cameras on, do simple things around the social field. When people come into the room, be there to welcome them. I was just even aware as you folk were coming into the room today, so hard to say hi and connect and welcome and glad to see you. And I'm so glad you have come, and to do the basic stuff that supports building that container and the start of the social field. So thank you for that, Alan. I think it's a great observation and spot on. So the generative order and the prime model is a model that I've been working with, I suppose, for the last 20 years, or developed it over 20 years. It's sort of been in this form in the last 10 or so. And it's sort of just evolved out of some early work that I did with Beth Jananoa and Glennifer Gillespie, who I think some of you may know very well, and who worked with Peter and Bill initially. But it's also sort of borrows from this idea of David Boehm's idea of a generative order and unfolding a particular sequence in which things might come into the world. But in recent years as well, I've been very encouraged by the work of Ian McGilchrist around the divided brain, our divided brain, and looking at some of the research about how we pay attention. And so what I'm excited about in terms of the model that's built in the frameworks, that a bunch of frameworks that sit beneath it, is that it sort of aligns with a whole lot of stuff that's already out there, but the meta model for it is the human brain. And so building on what Tom was saying earlier, that experience that people have when they come back to their body, when they mindfully reflect on their thinking, of where their intention is, how they're feeling. Just that experience is a right hemisphere experience of coming back into the moment. So left hemisphere is worried about the past and worried about the future, but that mindful practice is putting people back into the right hemisphere. And so in terms of the generative order, this is really our invitation for everybody to live and work on purpose. And really the first piece, or the first question in anything, whether it's a meeting, getting married, setting up an academy, whatever it might be, is some of that work. And Theory U does some of it in terms of going out into the context and spending time there. But it really is about listening into the future, to use some of that language. And it's a sense of what's being called for. it's the ecocentric perspective. What's the bigger picture that I'm keeping in mind and need to keep in mind as I go forward and you know, plan this meeting or design something. The second piece to that is then looking for, we call them instrumental relationships, and that sounds a bit mechanical for the right hemisphere, but really the quality of the social field. And what we're interested in the social field there is that if that's our purpose and we have a sense of what we want to achieve, then who's all affected? And what is the quality of their thinking and feeling and orientation towards what we're trying to get done? So if they are positively predisposed, if they're toward, and they're thinking and feeling in a positive way, you know, the quality of the social field is good. And so quite often it's not good. And we need to spend time getting people to think and feel about what we want to get done in a positive way. And we'll talk about how we do that. And then from that kind of right hemisphere to awareness, you know, right hemisphere, I'm not sure if you folks are familiar with Ian McGilchrist's work at all. Any hands for people who's familiar with his work? Okay, so right hemisphere is a noticing and a paying attention to reality around process and flow and what's unfolding, it's dynamic, etc. Left hemisphere has got language in it, distinctions, breaks things down, fragments things into its bits and pieces. Right hemisphere is about synthesis, left hemisphere is about analysis. And so once we've taken our thinking from the purpose and we've started working in the stakeholder, and a little bit different from what you're suggesting, Alan, I don't think there's a, you know, it's not a hard, fast rule, start where you can. But normally from, you know, from this point and onwards, already people might redefine the purpose. And then what you're doing, we do this sometimes in coaching. We say to people, in your heart of hearts, what do you think needs to be done? And they use their kind of cardiac brain to think about what they really value and what's important. And then we say, right now, give it to your head, you know, give it to your brain to go and think about the best ways to do that. So what we're doing at this point is we're handing it over to the thinker. So top right is an inspired mover, leader, visionary, the sovereign, whatever you might think of it in terms of different frameworks. Bottom right is the supporter, the lover, the citizen, to use some of Peter's distinctions. And then we hand it over to the brain, the top right, to start thinking about how we might get this done. And that's the magician, you know, and the magician's working with data and insight and perspective and thinking. And then we finally, you know, hand it off then to the warrior. So in our coaching, it's like, well, in my heart of hearts, I know what to do. I give it to my brain to think of the 3 ways I might do it. And then there's the third question is like, well, what have you got the guts to do? The sort of enteric brain that, you know, is action in the world and getting things done right. And so there seems to be, in terms of the generative order, there seems to be an order, a flow in which we can unfold things for our clients and ourselves. And getting clear and taking care and paying attention to these 4 areas seems to be particularly helpful and useful. Missing one or other can be quite problematic. So as a generative order, we would use this because it's sort of context perspective. If a meeting's not doing what it should do, or a report's not working, or a marriage doesn't work, or whatever it is, we could use the generative order to go back and redefine or check the purpose, check the quality of our, you know, the relationships and framing, check that we're clear around the kind of results that we're looking for and are clear about our goals and strategies to get that. So the reason I've shared this is because this, you know, we start with purpose in absolutely everything we do. And it's a great model to be able to communicate with clarity and some compassion and some coherence around what we're trying to get done at the end of the day. So there are lots of sort of similar models out there. Some of the not similar models, but models that have sort of similar domains and inquiry. You might think of some of those levels of perspective models with vision, mental models, systemic structure, and then patterns and events. You might think of Bill's flame model. I think it's identity, tone, I forget the other, and patterns at the end of them. But this is a particularly good model in terms of design thinking, and we can use it obviously for diagnosing systems as well. If I'm working with clients, often I do some executive coaching, and often the question is, well, how clear and aligned is your team at the moment around purpose? What's the quality of relationships at the moment? How intentional, what's the ambition? How ambitious are you being in terms of your intentionality? And are people clear and specific about what they want to achieve in terms of outcomes and results? So, yeah, I'm not sure. Are there any thoughts or questions that maybe arise from that? Something that maybe is not particularly clear? Patty? Your mic, Patty?
I like this model because I think for participants, it gives them something to get their hands around and to be able to visualize what's trying to be done. Here's where I am concerned. If you're going in, as you sort of suggested, there is probably trouble, which is why you're there. If you're going into a situation where trust is low, I feel like you could get stalled at number 2 without being able to move on in any genuine way because of the suspicion around the community and the colleagues and whatnot. Do you have any thoughts about how to build trust before we're able to move on?
Sure. So, Patty, I'm sure that there'll be a bunch of opinions and thoughts from colleagues around how best to do that. There's probably a bunch of different things you could do, but I think the most important thing is really an early assessment of, is the quality of that social field what it needs to be? If it's not, then I think there's a bunch of strategies and ways that we might work into that. For example, if I'm working with this model, and just to come back and use it more practically, sorry, am I talking over somebody there? Just to finish it before I go to you, Jenny. So I would use this model all the time. If I'm sending an email, I'll say, this is the purpose of sending the email to you. These are the people that are involved in the situation. But more particularly, when we're working in groups of people, we'll start with them and say, okay, this is the purpose of the meeting. Here's how I'd like you to think about this situation. So we literally frame for people how we would like them to think about the initiative or the change or whatever it might be. We invite them and we advocate very clearly what we think would be a resourceful framing around it. So yeah, we're quite explicit about what we think is a good. And when we talk about framing, I think what's an extension in this work, I used to think, framing was George Lakoff's work around linguistic framing. But it's more than that. I can frame with my body. I can frame with my framing is how I'm holding myself. It's how I'm thinking. It's how I'm feeling. It's all of those. And so I think the little key here is back into one of our taglines, which is how people feel and think about situations, others, and themselves is important because it impacts what they say and do and the results we'll get. So that aspect of taking care of that framing within the social field seems to be particularly useful and valuable. Jenny, what are you thinking?
Well, it was a question in the chat from Peter. I don't know if Peter want to ask it, but it was a great question, and I would like to hear the answer to that myself. So it was about disagreement and that you had put in the chat, Peter.
Yes, Nancy and I were in a meeting yesterday that Nancy was leading, and by the way, she did a masterful job of navigating the dialogic process. But there was at one point in time a bit of disagreement going on. And it's a great group of knowledge workers, very competent humans. And it just, we navigated it pretty well as a group. The social field worked. But but it raised the question for me, and I've thought about this overnight. How do I deal with differences in a dialogic fashion? So much of what we see in our world today is differences not being dealt with dialogically, but being dealt with in a kind of a hostile, adversarial manner. And so I'm trying to, again, rethink, okay, Pete, how do you enter the space, manage yourself in the space, to be able to try to help the interaction be dialogic rather than hostile and destructive.
So Peter, yeah, just to sort of go back, we're teaching people really the basics of dialogue. There's nothing particularly advanced here. So, you know, in that sense, we're teaching people to be able to challenge with respect. And what does that look like? It looks like a sequence of moves. It looks like going to supporter and listening participatively to what the other person is offering, with curiosity, with fascination even, after having suspended, you know, our own sort of thinking and ideas around it, really unpacking or getting a full sense of what that person is offering. And then on the back of that, then coming back and saying, well, I learned this or I understand that, but I'm seeing it slightly differently. So we're setting up the context for, and this is the work in dialogue, I think, is you know, how do we extract the full value that participants, because people, you know, when people move and make suggestions or have opinions, they're offerings, they offer tentatively in service of the larger conversation. And challenging is important, but so is, you know, perhaps following a dialogic sequence that starts with going to support, listening attentively, and then being able to come back. I think for two reasons. One is because practically what we notice is that if I can listen attentively to someone else, it almost there's a reciprocity that suddenly becomes available in terms of them being able to voice and articulate some of my thinking well. So it might sound a little bit of a trite answer, and I hope it's not, Peter, but certainly that's, you know, within dialogue, that's the practice. And just to add to that, you know, one of my frustrations that I have when I look at the current context and look at the quality of conversations online, is we often are having a conversation where we will get stuck into disagreements about the how to do things.
Yeah.
And so what I've noticed, and this is from our ontological work as well, is a little piece below that of inquiry is, what are you trying to take care of? So whether it's a, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, who it is, or whether it's around vaccination, or, you know, whether it's political party stuff or whatever, those human concerns we all share. So if it's a, you know, a conspiracy guy, whoever it might be, and I say, what are you trying to care of? And he says, I'm worried about them injuring my children. I can completely identify with that. Of course, what he's doing, how he's doing, I might disagree with. So I think there is in dialogue a way that we can connect on that human level at our human concerns. Like, and everybody in dialogic work, we talk about humans as being sets of walking concerns.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time when we get stuck, it's like, well, what are you trying to take care of here? And that seems to be very helpful and useful to get past some of the impasses. Is that useful, Peter?
Yeah, this is a great discussion. Thank you for leading and guiding us through it, and for everybody participating. This is very valuable, Rooken. Thank you.
Rooken, so first, if you do you want to go give people a chance to go into breakout rooms, or when? I think you were going in that direction. So just let me know when you want to do that.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Tom, I was thinking, and maybe just to put it to the group as well, we could use some of these questions maybe to reflect either on the US Academy or on this particular initiative that you have started today. I mean, today is significant, and I feel really honored to be like the first person up, the first guinea pig into the machine. But I think there is a purposefulness that's maybe a little bit opaque. I think there is a way that you'd maybe like people to think about this initiative. I presume, you know, there's an intentionality that I'm seeing unfold here in terms of inviting me. But you know, what are some of the specific desired results that you'd like to get from this initiative? If folks would find that useful, we could do that, or we could, you know, even inquire at a higher level. You know, if we're listening to the context, what wants to unfold for the US Academy? You know, as we listen into that sort of unfolding future. And I sort of truncated myself earlier. But when there are shifts and changes in context, then purpose shifts and changes as well. Very simple example, I worked with a client, used to put together monthly reports, all sorts of backends, Excel spreadsheets, struggled to get it done. And then one month they had a bit of a drama in one of the docs that supports authority, and they didn't send off the report and nobody ever asked for it. And so that then, you know, the purposefulness and the context that shifted and changed. And so we do that. We know we have meetings that aren't as good as they should be, and something shifted and changed, and we can go back and we can redesign a meeting that's purposeful, you know, related and intentional and outcome. So Tom, what's your sense? What would you like folks to have a bit of a chat about?
Well, I love the question is what is the need here? And everybody has shown up today, and we are trying to start something. You know, we're really trying to get the US Academy up and running. I think there is some, for me, there's this, it's the social field, it's the need there to feel more connected to a wider body of people and to feel part of a learning community. So that's where I would go at the moment. Rooken, is maybe give us some time to think together about that.
And
Okay.
Nina has been wanting to speak.
Yeah. Yes, sorry to interrupt, Tom, but
Okay,
thank you so much for that idea, Rooken. I've been enjoying listening to your models. I've worked in corporate America for 40 years, and a lot of my work was intra and inter-team building. So I actually had a question about how we take this to a team level, but I think just if we're going to move into the US Academy, one point I want to make is US Academy is a misnomer, in my view. In other words, it's a regional name. We are actually a virtual global community of members that want to do action learning, like you were talking about. We really want to, we're listening to your models, and we would love to hear about your challenges and so on. That's what we're passionate about, is how we make this real, how we make this popular, as you said, how we, in our own little domains, in the different areas, some of us don't do it in corporate anymore, we do it in communities. So I just wanted to make a point that when you think US Academy, think of a virtual learning community. That would be but I love the idea of going with that. Thanks, Rooken.
Pleasure.
Okay,
So
just a few more hands up. Let's make sure we get to everybody with the hands up. So I think it's Alan and then Lourdes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, again, I'm always come to these meetings, and I'm very grateful for them, and I echo what Mino has said. But taking the last two comments, how do I do that in a dialectic manner? And taking what Leo said after that, the desire to bring out and learn from differences. In the model, the first thing I question is do the right thing. There has to be agreement about what is right. And I'm thinking of issues of global warming, and one set of argument would be, well, from my perspective, I see that it's important that we continue with fossil fuels because, and then dealing with the moment, and then from another perspective, a step further back, the different perspectives, how do you find common ground? So the ability to tolerate the differences, the ability to be able to live with those differences seems to me to be the fundamental first step in order to get to where we're talking about, to be able to actually communicate with each other and find common ground. So even the first question about do the right thing, the assumption is that we all know what the right thing is, even going into the conversation. And so I wonder if you need to have a high tolerance for discord, for conflict, in order to come to a place where the perspectives are able to be seen and heard, and that is the first thing to allow for the bringing out and the learning from the differences.
Spot on. Lord?
Yeah. You said my name, Lourdes? Lourdes.
Lourdes.
Okay. Yeah. So one thing that struck me about this model is that it didn't say much about the place that I'm coming from as a participant in this dialogue. Or, you know, even as a moderator, you want to invite people to participate from a certain point of view, right? From a place of awareness, from a place of feeling like a part of the whole, and setting that tone in the room, you know, of how we're, you know, being clear with our assumptions, putting them out on the table, being able to inquire into our assumptions. So I feel like there is something about how you come into this discussion from the right way, as opposed to in the right way, like you have it.
I'm going to do this just very briefly. Let's get ready, get rid of that. So here's what I want to just build on what Alan and you are both saying. So in any situation, there are what we call a plurality of purposes. And you can think of in a room, I mean, some of, you know, just in terms of our group here today, you've all come with a different purpose. Some of them may be similar. Some of you have come to connect. Some of you have come to learn. Some of you have come to contribute. And there's a bunch of reasons and reasons why you've chosen to be here today. So Alan, you know, the first piece is for us to come together and to, if I'm going on, you know, I'd love to use those really simple examples. If I'm going on holiday with my wife, I work in a very different context than she does. So when we're designing a holiday together and we say to each other, you know, we're going to have this holiday, what's the purpose of this holiday? Why are we having it? Our contexts are different, and so our purposes are different. So we have to have a conversation about designing this holiday that's going to work for both of us. And first thing we need to do is get clear about, and that relates to, you know, to the bottom question, which is when we arrive home, how will we know that this has been a great holiday for both of us? And then, Lord, to your piece, you know, so what we would do in you know, you would take care of the piece that you want to, but you would, for example, get the group together and you'd say, right, folks, the purpose of the meeting is the following. Here's how I'd like you to come to the meeting. This is the way of being that I'd love you to come to the meeting. And so we're very explicit and clear about how we'd like people to show up. So it's not a prescriptive framework, but it's I suppose it's not an algorithm, it's a sort of heuristic, a general rule of thumb that we can use and work into. I don't think I've answered the question around working with teams, but so what I'd love us to do then is maybe let's use the model to explore a little bit this sort of idea of the social field. And so in your paired breakouts, you know, this is what I'd love you to be thinking about. It's like, why? You know, what's the current context and purpose that makes building a social field important and valuable? I won't put words into your mouth, but you know, there should be a bunch of things as you listen into the context, as you get a sense of what's happening around us, you know, societally. I won't even go there, but there's a kind of a calling. There's a listening around you know, coming together, building strong social fields, dealing with fragmentation of relationships, etc. Then the other thing in terms of framing, and I just want to go into a little bit more detail just to answer that or to explore that. So let me do this quickly. So around the social field, you know, why, what's its reason for being? What are we trying to take care of with the social field? What's the context calling for, etc.? What's the highest possibility that wants to emerge here? You know, so we ask it's like when we're coaching each other. It's like, well, what's the highest possibility that wants to unfold for this person? Or for your kid, you know, you've got a boy and a girl. It's like, what really wants to unfold for him is quite different what, you know, for what wants to unfold for her. But what is that? And sensing into it, and then building an environment that would allow that to happen. When we get into the social field bit, is like, well, what are their concerns? What are people calling for? You've got a whole community of people who've arrived here for a variety of reasons, wanting different things. You've got a name called the US Academy, which seems maybe still appropriate, or maybe it needs to be changed to be more representative or whatever. But really, in terms of building the social field, how must members think when you invite them to kind of to get together for coffee or to check in for a hub? Just what Nancy was saying earlier, just that shift away from egocentrically thinking about situations to ecocentrically thinking. You know, I'm coming together to build a social field because not to get from it, but to contribute to it. So it's, you know, if I stay away, it's a problem. And yeah, I won't go into that. I'll just very briefly, you know, intention is, you know, what's an intelligent way to go forward. And then lastly, around specific desired results. If you're going to be doing this work as the academy and coming together and building the social field, or how will you know that you built a great social field? How will you be measuring it? You know, what are your metrics in terms of getting that done? So I'm just going to go back to the higher level, more simple questions. So Tom, if we could break out into pairs.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's possible to put this in the chat line. Maybe I can. I'll just see if I can get it into chat. I'll just type it in there. And then let's break out, if we can do 5 minutes each, Tom.
Okay. So 5 minutes in pairs, Rooken?
Yeah, 5 minutes each. And we just use the expert journalist model. So, you know, give the other person an opportunity to speak, inquire with curiosity, don't interrupt, you know, all the basics that go for having a decent conversation. And just, yeah, gather each other's thoughts, and we'll meet you back here.
So we're going for 10 minutes then total, Rooken, 5 minutes each.
Yes, please, Tom.
Okay, and in pairs. All right, everybody, here you go.
Rooken,
Anything
there
else?
was a question about bigger groups
Say
instead
again,
of
Margaret.
pairs. There was a question to have bigger groups instead of pairs.
I don't feel strongly about it either way. I'm quite happy. Tom, what's easiest for you?
I have pairs set up where we can go back to. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I had a wonderful time. So over to you, Rooken.
You're muted, Rooken.
Rooken, you're mute.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so what are some of your thoughts about what may be unfolding for the academy? I shared in my group, one of the questions I often ask in order to sort of, because really what we're going is around deeper purpose, is what are the things that just wouldn't be possible if there wasn't a US Academy? So, you know, if we go from there into then there's a social field and who should be in that social field and, you know, that type of thing. So maybe there's some thoughts, and somebody wants to sort of lead and share a little bit about what you discovered and thought about.
Yeah,
Mina?
Rooken, this is Mina. If I could share, we had a question before that, before we get to the US Academy, because we are two organizations or subsets or whatever. We said there's chaos, there's confusion, there's a lack of clarity, and we welcome the state of chaos and confusion and perhaps differing perspectives. And we want to embrace it. And we want to just keep asking your question, what is the overarching purpose of not just the US Academy, but the International Academy? So if we look at the greater purpose, If we get clear on that, then we can come out of the chaos gracefully.
And just to, I love this. So just to watch the time, Rooken. So we've got about 10 minutes, so maybe kind of this can be the checkout time for people.
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great.
So I checked out, Tom.
Yes, well, check out, that's what I'm saying. That's a great model. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Checking out?
So this is Harold, and my group is pretty much where you are. We felt that you cannot just take a look at the U.S. Academy in isolation because it's a spinoff from the International Academy, and so we have to speak about both academies and what's missing, and why isn't there that obvious common ground that's necessary to have us then be able to evolve either together or knowingly separately. With some nexus, with some connection. And that needs to be the focal point of our conversation.
And there's a quality of the social field between the two, right?
Yes.
So,
Go ahead, Patty.
I was in Harold's group, and I'm new to this. I just started doing this work with the international group in January. So what sounds interesting to me is to have the US group be start in conversation about like what we're doing, who we are in our own dialogic journey, to see where we fit, and then reconnect with the international, not make these separate or parallel, but just have conversations first to decide, just to talk about what it is we value and then make the connection.
I love that. Anybody support that? I do.
Yes, I will definitely support that, because we kind of spoke of it in our group also. I was in with Nancy and Jewel, and just to kind of sum it up, we basically spoke of the same thing, and Nancy actually brought to light that maybe some of the next meetings, even though for the U.S. Academy are already set up and scheduled, we may need to talk more about what the purpose is and the expectations, and just to kind of build on that social inclusion, if you will.
Well, maybe that's a good time to turn to Leo, who will be leading us in the next session. So maybe to Leo and Rebecca, do you want to speak to that, you guys, to set us up?
I'm just going to defer to Leo and just say that next time we will be meeting on May 26th, same time, a Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, and all the time zones represented in this room right now. And I'm putting a registration link, but I have appreciations for you, Rooken, and thoughts, but I'm going to just defer to Leo right now and hear how you'd like to answer.
So thank you. I love what we did here today, and I really appreciate Elizabeth speaking up and saying that we need to have more than two, because the three that I was with collectively was amazing. And one of the things that we talked about was how to cultivate and bridge this gap between people who, this false dichotomy of people who focus on material things and people who focus on people who care about materials and people who care about people, and that carrying us to a place of not just teaching and evangelizing dialogue, but carrying it with us in our day-to-day practice in a way that is healing and cultivating of communities of care, so that we can use this academy, use this virtual space as a place to establish a community of care, so that we know what it actually feels like, so that we can step outside of here and actually do it in our lives, regardless of where we are. And so I'd like to use my space next, or our space, hopefully everyone's going to be there next month, our space next month, to take a step into that, out of theory into practice in a very real and humanizing way that is so very much lacking in a lot of the spaces that we find ourselves.
Rooken, last comments.
Yeah, I think in generative leadership, we choose to think about everything from a perspective of potential and opportunity. And it feels like there's lots of potential and opportunity to do a lot more, and to bring some focus to some of the work. And I think they're exciting conversations. I think as much as we want to think about the institutions or the academies, I think there's an inquiry a little bit higher around why do we need dialogue? Who should be involved? Should we? I don't want to go back into the conversations. Just to say thank you so much, Tom, for the invitation to be the first. I feel like there will never be another first, and I'm here. And also just to say, I hope that you get to enjoy and use the prior, and that we can perhaps get things done in ways that are clear and collaborative and coherent and committed. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Well, thanks, Rooken and Leo. We're looking forward to your session. We have 2 minutes, so maybe we just do a feeling word, just quickly. Everybody just do a feeling word, and my feeling word would be intrigued,
Enlightened.
Hopeful.
Grateful.
Hopeful as well.
Encouraged.
Refreshed.
Connected.
Optimistic.
Contemplative.
Supported.
Curious.
Well served.
Thankful.
Grateful.
Enlightened.
Mm.
Beautiful, everybody. Thank you all so much. See you next month.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Thank you, Rooken.
Thank you.
It's Rooken.